This is not just a crime. It's a nightmare that unfolded in broad daylight. A young woman, full of life and dreams, murdered inside her own apartment during her lunch break. What police uncovered was darker than anyone imagined. A trusted co-worker, secretly obsessed, sneaking into her home, planting hidden cameras, and finally striking in the most brutal way. This is one of the most shocking, tragic, and unforgettable cases ever told. And once you hear it, you'll never see trust the same way again. Carolyn Binkton was born on May 30th, 1993 in Plainsboro, New Jersey, where she grew up with her parents and older sister. From an early age, she dreamed of exploring the world. After graduating high school, Carolyn enrolled at Lafayette College, where she threw herself into academics and international study. She participated in 2 study abroad programs that took her to Japan and Germany, and ultimately earned 3 degrees: international affairs, sociology, and anthropology. In 2015, she graduated and began working at a marketing firm near her hometown. Wanting to remain close to family, she rented an apartment in Plainsboro. Outside of work, she volunteered with a local youth league, stayed active in community service, and continued to travel whenever possible. By the summer of 2019, Carolyn was 26 years old and well-established in her career. But on June 10th, something unusual happened. Around midday, she left the office to go home for lunch, something her co-workers said she almost never did. When she didn't return that afternoon, concern grew. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Carolyn was known for her reliability, and this behavior was completely out of character. By evening, her co-workers' unease turned into alarm. They contacted police to request a welfare check. Around 6 p.m., officers arrived at her apartment and found the front door unlocked. Inside, they were met with a disturbing scene. Carolyn lay dead on the floor, blood pooled around her. While the medical examiner examined the body, detectives canvassed the building. One neighbor reported hearing screams around noon, followed by odd noises like furniture being moved in Carolyn's apartment. No one, however, recalled seeing any strangers coming or going, and the complex lacked security cameras. Inside, investigators noted an even more troubling detail. The killer had attempted to clean the scene with bleach, almost certainly the noises the neighbor had heard. Despite this effort, the medical examiner was able to piece together the attack. Carolyn had been beaten repeatedly, then stabbed multiple times in the neck. The weapons were a pair of scissors and a screwdriver, both traced back to her own apartment. There were no signs of sexual assault, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. With robbery and assault ruled out, detectives concluded the attack was personal. Its sheer brutality suggested rage rather than opportunism. Detectives interviewed Carolyn's family and friends, but none could imagine anyone wanting to hurt her. She was described as warm, compassionate, and non-confrontational. She wasn't in a relationship, had no volatile exes, and lived a quiet, community-centered life. Attention turned to her workplace. That's where detectives found their first lead. On the day Carolyn left the office for lunch, another employee had also left, 30-year-old Kenneth Saul. On its own, that detail wasn't suspicious, but Kenneth hadn't returned until much later in the day. According to his manager, Kenneth had called in to say he was having car trouble and was taking his vehicle to a repair shop. But when the manager later checked, there was no record of Kenneth ever visiting the location he mentioned. Colleagues recalled other odd behavior as well. When Kenneth eventually returned to work, he seemed nervous. They noticed scratches on his hands. At one point during casual conversation, Kenneth even asked if police could arrest someone solely on circumstantial evidence. For investigators, These details raised far more questions than answers. Are you ready to dive into some of the most terrifying cases in the world? Don't miss a single detail. Oh, and make sure to subscribe to my channel. Your support gives me the motivation to create even better content in the future. We're just a few subscribers away from reaching our first 500, so help me hit that milestone. Now let's get back to this chilling journey into the world of crime. Police were immediately intrigued by the details surrounding Kenneth Saul and decided to dig deeper. On paper, he hardly looked like a suspect. He was an accountant, married, and a new father. His daughter had been born just a year earlier. He had no criminal record and no history of violence. But the red flags were impossible to ignore, so detectives brought him in for questioning. Kenneth repeated the story he had already told his boss. He'd left work at lunch to take his car to a repair shop. But when pressed for proof, receipts, paperwork, even a phone call to confirm, he couldn't provide anything. Then, under pressure, his story shifted. He now claimed he hadn't gone to a shop at all, but instead fixed the car himself in a nearby park. That change in his account set off alarms. First, altering his story at all made him look unreliable. And second, Kenneth was an accountant, not someone known for handling serious auto repairs on his own, especially during a workday. Still, Kenneth denied any involvement in Carolyn's murder, and at that point, investigators didn't have enough to charge him. Then came a breakthrough. While pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses, detectives also reviewed dash cam video from a patrol car that had passed through the area shortly after noon. On the footage, they spotted Kenneth's car. It was a critical detail. Carolyn's apartment complex was 6 miles from the office, in another town altogether. Kenneth had claimed he was in a park near work, but the camera placed him right near her home. While this was still circumstantial, it added weight to the case. Another clue came from the autopsy. Medical examiners found traces of skin under Carolyn's fingernails, clear evidence she had scratched her attacker while fighting for her life. And Kenneth had fresh scratches on his hands that he couldn't explain. Unfortunately, the biological material wasn't enough for a full DNA profile. When Kenneth's DNA was tested, the results came back inconclusive. It wasn't a definitive match, but it didn't rule him out either. Despite the lack of direct evidence, detectives were increasingly convinced Kenneth was responsible. Over the next several weeks, they searched for anything else to strengthen their case, but nothing new surfaced. Finally, after consulting with the district attorney, they decided the circumstantial evidence could still stand up in court. 2 months after Carolyn's murder, Kenneth was arrested and charged, and then the case took an unexpected turn. As investigators continued building their file, a letter arrived from the jail, written by Kenneth's cellmate. Its contents stunned detectives. According to the inmate, Kenneth had offered him $15,000 to commit a murder after his release. The instructions were chillingly precise. The victim had to be a random woman between 25 and 30. The weapon had to be a screwdriver and a pair of scissors, and the attack had to include stabbing in the neck. Kenneth even told him to clean the scene with bleach afterward. It was a near-perfect mirror of Carolyn's murder, and exactly what detectives needed to push their case forward. Detectives had little doubt that Kenneth's cellmate was telling the truth. At that point, the specific details of Carolyn's murder, the use of scissors and a screwdriver, the bleach at the scene, had not been made public. Only the killer could have known those details. It became clear what Kenneth was trying to do. His plan was to orchestrate another killing that mirrored Carolyn's, making it look like a serial predator was targeting young women. Since he would already be behind bars when the second attack happened, He believed investigators would be forced to rule him out. But that wasn't his only idea. Kenneth also floated a second plan to his cellmate, one even more bizarre than the first. He suggested that the cellmate could kill either the lead detective on the case or one of the people police had already interviewed during the investigation. If the cellmate chose the second option, Kenneth wanted the murder staged to look like a suicide, complete with a note confessing to Carolyn's killing. The idea was simple: frame someone else, close the case, and walk free. As for killing the detective, Kenneth never explained how that would exonerate him. He just seemed to believe that without the lead investigator, the entire case would collapse. He even gave his cellmate advice on how to get away with the murders, ignoring the obvious fact that he himself had been caught almost immediately. The plans were crude, almost childish, but Kenneth was deadly serious. He believed this would work. Detectives decided to test him. They asked the inmate to wear a wire and bring up the schemes in conversation. The cellmate agreed. Before long, investigators had Kenneth on tape casually discussing arrangements for multiple killings. That same day, prison staff searched Kenneth's cell. Inside, they found several handwritten notes confessing to Carolyn's murder. Kenneth intended for these to be planted next to the body of his cellmate's supposed victim, just as he had outlined. He hadn't even considered that investigators would compare the handwriting. With that, Kenneth had not only handed detectives more evidence tying him to Carolyn's murder, but also ensured new charges, conspiracy to commit murder, would be added to the list. And yet, even with all of this, detectives still had no clear answer to the biggest question of all. Why? Why had Kenneth killed Carolyn in the first place? That answer wouldn't come until years later. In November 2022, 3 years after his arrest, prosecutors offered Kenneth a deal. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, they still lacked definitive DNA, fingerprints, or other rock-solid forensic proof. That made the looming trial risky. So they offered a plea bargain. Kenneth would admit to the killing in exchange for a reduced sentence. He agreed. In his confession, Kenneth explained that he had first met Carolyn in 2016, shortly after he started working at the company. Over time, he developed romantic feelings for her, despite being married and raising a young daughter. Carolyn, however, was not interested. She made that clear. But Kenneth wasn't willing to let it go. On the surface, he appeared to move on. He never harassed her or made any obvious advances. To co-workers, it looked like nothing more than a passing crush. But beneath the surface, his fixation grew stronger with each passing year. Quietly, it turned into an obsession, and that obsession eventually spiraled into stalking. At some point before the murder, Kenneth secretly took Carolyn's keys and made a copy, slipping the originals back without her ever realizing. From then on, he began letting himself into her apartment whenever she wasn't home, often during lunch breaks. His obsession escalated even further when he planted hidden cameras inside the apartment so he could watch her private life unfold. Carolyn had no idea. For months, Kenneth returned regularly to check the cameras. But on June 10, 2019, his carefully constructed routine unraveled. That afternoon, Carolyn decided, uncharacteristically, to go home for lunch. Kenneth had left the office early and was already inside her apartment when he heard her key turning in the lock. Panicked, he ducked behind the door. When Carolyn stepped inside, he realized he had nowhere to escape. According to his own confession, he launched into a sudden attack, slamming her to the floor and striking her in the head. He then grabbed a pair of scissors and a screwdriver, items taken from her own apartment, and stabbed her repeatedly, focusing on her neck. When the assault ended, Kenneth tried to erase the evidence. He poured bleach around the scene, attempting to wipe away the traces of his crime. But there was too much blood to conceal. Grabbing the hidden cameras he had planted, he fled, leaving the apartment behind. Hours later, he returned to work, acting as if nothing had happened. In January 2023, Kenneth was sentenced to 45 years in prison for Carolyn's murder, plus an additional 10 years for conspiracy to commit murder after attempting to hire a fellow inmate to carry out copycat killings. Before sentencing, Kenneth addressed the court. He apologized to Carolyn's family, telling them, "I'm sorry every day for my choices. If there was any way I could take back what I've done, I would. I regret immensely the pain I have caused you all. There are no words big enough to describe the atrocities I've committed or the misery I've brought upon you." He also turned to his own family, who sat in stunned silence. "I'm sorry for the way I am, and that I've hidden it from you my entire life. The facade I put up kept you from seeing any warning signs. I can only imagine the pain I've caused you and the shock of learning the truth." But for many connected to the case, those words rang hollow. Not only had Kenneth brutally killed Carolyn to cover his secret life, he had also plotted to frame others, or even arrange additional murders, just to escape responsibility. His courtroom remorse stood in sharp contrast to his earlier actions. Kenneth's wife, blindsided by the revelations, filed for divorce soon after his arrest. Despite his guilty plea and lengthy sentence, Kenneth quickly tried to appeal. He argued that some of the evidence used against him had been obtained improperly and should have been excluded. But in late 2024, the appellate court rejected his claim, ruling that the investigation had been conducted lawfully. His original sentence stood. With that, Kenneth Saul's fate was sealed. Barring extraordinary circumstances, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. A once ordinary family man revealed to be a hidden predator whose obsession turned into one of Plainsborough's most shocking murders. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time.